My second son was the first to get diagnosed with autism, and it wasn't until much later that my first son was diagnosed at the age of 10. For years, we just thought that his behaviors were ADHD, learning differences, and his strong personality. Looking back now, I can see all the signs, but at the time, autism wasn't even on my radar.
Raising neurodivergent kids is messy, beautiful, and a lot. I'm Mary Ellen Yates, and this is Growing Together, Neurodiversity at Home. Let's figure it out together.
Okay, let's get started. From the time he was little, my oldest son was always very active and busy and curious. He was always trying to help me with my chores. For a little while, we were living on my parents' farm and helping my dad feed the horses, and it was quite a long walk, and he would go do it. He was a doer to the point where he didn't start imaginative play until he was way older. When he was around 2.5, my parents gave him a kitchen for a Christmas present, and he thought it was broken because the water didn't turn on and didn't come out of the pepper shaker, and he would get so frustrated. And so we had to show him what play looked like. And eventually he got it, and he still plays today. He was always into things he shouldn't touch and often broke a lot of things. Sometimes I think with emotional dysregulation, but oftentimes just curiosity, trying to figure out how things worked, and the result being a broken item. So we got way more particular about the type of toys or things that would come into our home. He loved dinosaurs like my other son, and he loved trains. He would set up train tracks and have the trains go for hours, and he would line up his dinosaurs. But my son always really gravitated towards other kids. Whenever we would go to a playground, he was always trying to play with them. I noticed he was struggling with some of the rules when you're playing with kids. So at home, we would work on role playing to teach him how to share and how to say no kindly and different things like that. And he responded really well, learning those social cues and how to do it. And also remember that he wasn't speaking till about 3. So sometimes when he was having a hard times with kids, he was hitting them or biting them or throwing something at him because he didn't know how to express himself. So he was always very affectionate with me. My mom said that he didn't necessarily cuddle with them as much, but he would like climb on them and sit next to them. And I never noticed any lack of eye contact with him. From the age of 2, I knew that he had at least ADHD. Both my parents had ADHD. My younger sister had ADHD. My husband had ADHD. And so we weren't surprised when we were starting to see ADHD traits with our 2-year-old. Started homeschooling him at 4 because he had a hard time in school. Around first grade, I really started getting worried about him reading. And I started that whole process of getting the academic testing done. They officially diagnosed him with ADHD. We got the diagnosis of dyslexia also. And then later with further testing was calculia. And so with the ADHD and then the learning differences, a lot of his pushback and having a hard time, I just figured all the things we were expecting him to do were really hard for him. There are some clues that make sense for autism that we figured out later on. And some of these things were sensory. So he has a really, really hard time with noise. Unless he's making that noise himself, noises are annoying to him, and he has a hard time with loud noises. He'll often cover his ears. He wears earmuffs a lot when he's doing school and sometimes in social situations as well, especially at church because the music can be loud for him. He will even run out of the room if it's really intense for him. He has a hard time socially with adults. Comes off rude or has a more flat affect with adults, especially if adults are asking a lot of questions. He finds it boring. When we moved to Georgia, I found him a counselor to help him with some coping skills and emotional dysregulation and all that. So he started seeing a therapist, and he definitely did not want to go in by himself, so I went with him. And that first meeting, he would not speak to her. She would talk to me for a while, then she would try to ask him questions, and he point blank said, "I'm not answering your questions." And so she started talking to me again, and then she tried with him, and he said, "I told you I'm not talking to you." And so leaving the appointment, I asked him, "What did you think of her?" And he said, "She was nice, she just asked too many questions." You would not know that he thought she was nice or liked her by the interaction they had. But over time, he eventually started talking to her, and now it's his favorite appointment each week. So he's pretty about his clothing. He likes pants with elastic, really doesn't like jeans that are more structured and fitted. So he will wear those clothes when it calls for it, but otherwise he's mostly going to be in his sweatpants. He hides food all around our house and he likes to save it in different spots. He likes to collect our things, and a lot of times he doesn't like his siblings to have their own toys because he likes to have them in his room and control their use of them. And so because of that, his room is often very cluttered. Sleep is often hard for him. When he was younger, falling asleep wasn't hard, but staying asleep was harder. And then as he got older, falling asleep was also hard. When my second son was diagnosed with autism, we started using melatonin with him. So then we started also giving it to my older child as well. And so that helped with a lot of their sleep issues for a while. But then eventually my older child also, he would sleep from the melatonin, but then he would not stay asleep. And then he would raid our refrigerators and go through all of our food. At times got tortillas and ate some, but then threw the rest of them around our house. Also, he was going into our room and taking our phones while we were sleeping. And so we had a lot of issues that were around sleep. He sees a psychiatrist for medication, and so that was one of the priorities, was finding something that would help him sleep. We're asking him to do all these hard things during the day. Plus, we were having so many behavioral issues we were having to deal with, and we really just didn't feel like it was safe for him to be awake, not being supervised while we were trying to sleep. Outside time, that's always been very important to him, so that's what he needs for self-regulation. Pushing boundaries was a common thing that we were dealing with. If he didn't quite agree with, he might try to find ways around that rule. And also noticed when there were things he was interested in, but we told him to leave it alone because it was ours or it wasn't the right time, we could tell he was really fixated on it. He could not let that thing go because he had not had a chance to analyze it and whatever. So often when we would leave the room or later, he would go back to that thing that we told him not to touch, and he would go and mess with it and do whatever he wanted to do to figure it out. And oftentimes the thing would break too because he was curious and didn't know how to use that thing. So we were in Germany for 4.5 years. So a big part of his childhood, because he moved when he was 5, we were noticing these things, but we couldn't find providers to really help us with them. So when we moved back to the States, to Georgia, I started making a lot of appointments, starting to get a lot of resources. And as we're making these appointments and we're meeting with providers, one of the first things you're doing when you're having these initial appointments is going over the medical history of the family. And I would disclose that his younger brother had autism. And a few providers asked, well, does he have it also? And I said, no, he's not diagnosed with it. But then I started thinking, does run in families. And maybe that is the piece that we're missing a little after he turned 10. He finally had the full psychological testing done, and it did show that he had autism. Up until that point, it never even crossed my mind. I think this is really so important because as he was getting older, he was becoming more difficult, and it was becoming very frustrating. And I think knowing the intention behind the behavior makes a big difference in how you parent and how you as a parent process what you're dealing with. It helped me see him in a more positive light and a more understanding. And then we could both work together to create solutions that work for both of us. Because we're both living in this house, we both have to have solutions that are going to be working for us. So now my oldest son is 11. He also gets 12.5 hours of therapy a week between the different therapies. He now engages with all his therapists and has a pretty positive experience with all of them. And for the most part, he enjoys going to them, even though they're often asking him to do hard things. Some current challenges: he used to be almost a garbage disposal for us, where he would eat pretty much anything that we fed him. But nowadays he has started to get more picky about his food. He's finally on a medication that is helping him with sleep. We're continually trying to find solutions with him to keep his room organized and suggesting other places for some of the things to go. But it's definitely a work in progress. And he is 11 years old. He's definitely still pushing boundaries. And they honestly are still probably working the hardest on trying to find strategies that work with him and working on how we parent and what's the most effective with him. We have a lot of appointments. I homeschool, and sometimes it's challenging when you have a kid that's also fighting back. And so it's something we're still working on. But, you know, this kid is the most generous kid I've ever met. I even feel like he's over generous. If a friend wanted it, he would probably give all his belongings away. And often when his siblings eat up snacks really fast and they want more. There's no more to be had. And my oldest has like slowly been eating it. Often will give his portion away to them because they want more. And he's a kid that really likes to help, and he's very empathetic, and he sees a kid injured, especially a younger kid. He's trying to find their mom or dad, and he's trying to help them however he can. What I've learned through my 2 kids is that neurodivergence can look very different. Every child's journey is going to be different needs, different strengths. Do you have a late diagnosis, or has your child been diagnosed later in life? I would love to see your story in the comments. And remember to like and subscribe below. Thanks, bye.